The CEO leaned back in his leather chair and let out a heavy sigh. The office was quiet, the kind of quiet that only existed after everyone had gone home. He looked around the room at the polished floors, the shiny conference table, and the view of the city skyline outside the window. Everything looked perfect on the surface, but he knew better. He knew that behind the polished numbers, the successful projects, and the awards on the wall, something was missing. Something that no report could show. He had been in charge of this company for more than a decade. He had worked tirelessly to grow it from a small startup to a company that now employed hundreds. Profits were high, the brand was respected, and yet he felt disconnected. He hadn't spoken to the people on the front lines in months. Emails and reports told him what he wanted to know, but not what he needed to know. He wanted to understand the real stories, the struggles, and the moments that made people feel either proud or frustrated. He wanted to know the truth, the human side of the company. That evening, he made a decision. He would go undercover. He would step out of his executive bubble and experience life as one of his own employees. He would see the company from the perspective of someone who didn't have a corner office, someone who didn't set the strategy but followed it day after day. He wanted to see the small details, the hidden struggles, the tiny frustrations that added up into a bigger picture. He started by creating a new identity. He couldn't just walk in as the CEO wearing a suit and tie. That would be obvious. He needed to blend in. He chose a simple outfit, something that would not draw attention. Plain jeans, a casual shirt, and sneakers. He let his hair grow a little longer and wore glasses that made him look older and tired. He practiced walking with a slight slump in his shoulders, adjusting his voice to sound less confident and more unsure. He wanted to be ordinary, invisible in the crowd. The next morning, he arrived at the office as a new hire. He carried a small backpack with the essentials, just as any other employee would. He told security he was here for a temporary clerical role and handed over the fake ID he had prepared. No one looked twice. That was exactly what he wanted. He wanted to be just another person, blending into the rhythm of the office, unnoticed and free to observe. He was assigned to the clerical department, sitting at a small desk surrounded by other employees typing on their keyboards, answering phones and filing papers. It was a sharp contrast to his usual view from the executive suite, where assistants handled all the details, and he was focused on strategy and big-picture decisions. Here he was doing the work himself, sorting files, answering routine questions, and sending emails that seemed repetitive but were important to someone. At first, it was overwhelming. The pace was fast, the work was detailed, and the office chatter was constant. People greeted each other with familiarity he didn't have, and he felt out of place. He stumbled through his tasks, asked questions, and tried not to make mistakes. But slowly he began to observe. He watched how people interacted, the way they helped each other, the way they silently endured small annoyances. He noticed the laughter at shared jokes, the subtle signs of frustration when things went wrong, and the quiet satisfaction when a task was completed successfully. He began to talk to people, but cautiously. He asked simple questions about their work, about how they felt in the office, and about the challenges they faced. Most people responded politely, but he could sense that they held back. He realized that employees often didn't feel comfortable sharing their true feelings with someone they didn't know. They didn't want to complain, they didn't want to seem weak, and they didn't want to risk their jobs. This was something he hadn't seen before. As a CEO, he received filtered feedback. Now he was getting a glimpse of what people really felt, even if they didn't fully express it. Over the next few days, he continued to observe and learn. He noticed the small things that made life difficult for employees. Outdated software that slowed them down, unclear instructions from supervisors, and meetings that seemed unnecessary but were mandatory. He noticed the effort people put in to help each other, covering for mistakes and going out of their way to ensure the work was completed on time. He began to understand the human side of the company, the dedication, the resilience, and the hidden struggles that no report had ever shown him. One afternoon, while taking a short break in the break room, he overheard a conversation that made him pause. A few employees were talking quietly about a new hire, someone who had joined the company recently. They spoke with sympathy and concern, mentioning that she seemed stressed and isolated. He felt a pang of curiosity and concern. He wanted to meet her, to understand what was happening and to see if he could help in some way, even as a fellow employee. The next day, he noticed her for the first time. She was sitting at her desk, working diligently, her face tense, her movements careful and precise. She avoided eye contact with others and seemed to shrink in her chair whenever someone approached. She carried herself with a quiet intensity, and he could sense that she was trying very hard to meet expectations while hiding her struggles. He watched her navigate the office, quietly taking notes, filing documents, and answering questions, all while maintaining a calm exterior that barely masked her inner tension. He began to pay more attention, not just out of curiosity but out of genuine concern. He saw the effort she put in, the careful attention to detail and the dedication she showed despite the challenges. He noticed small signs of stress, a deep breath before answering a question, a brief hesitation before speaking, and the occasional downward glance as if she were holding back emotions. Something about her presence tugged at him, a sense that she was carrying more than she should have to, and it made him reflect on his own role as a leader. The CEO started to realize that the story of the company was not just in the numbers, the profits, or the market share. The story was in these quiet moments, the small acts of perseverance, the unspoken struggles, and the courage it took to keep going every day. He understood that the real work of a company was not just in strategy and planning, but in nurturing the people who made it function. These employees, often overlooked, were the lifeblood of the organization, and their well-being mattered more than any report could convey. By the end of the first week, he felt a shift in perspective. He had started the experiment with the goal of observing, but he found himself empathizing, caring, and worrying about the people around him. The office was no longer just a place of work. It was a community of human beings with hopes, fears, and dreams. He realized that understanding these people, their struggles, and their experiences was essential to being a good leader. He was learning lessons that no board meeting could teach him. He was seeing the importance of support, communication, and recognition. He was learning that small gestures, a kind word, a moment of patience, a helping hand, could make a significant difference in someone's day. And as he watched the new hire navigate her first week, he felt a deep sense of empathy, a desire to reach out, and a growing understanding that the heart of the company was not in the executive suite, but in these quiet, dedicated employees who gave their best every day. And so, the Undercover CEO continued his journey, ready to discover more, to listen more, and to see the unseen. Little did he know that the encounter with the new clerical worker in the break room would change everything he thought he knew about leadership, empathy, and the true meaning of success. The new employee walked into the office on her first day with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She had prepared for this moment for weeks, rehearsing the conversations she might have, imagining herself fitting in, and trying to anticipate the challenges she might face. She was determined to do her best, to show that she could handle the work and to make a positive impression. Yet, as she stepped through the doors and saw the bustling office, the dozens of people moving quickly between desks, answering phones and typing furiously, a wave of anxiety hit her. She clutched her bag tightly and took a deep breath. She was greeted by the HR representative, who gave her a brief orientation and introduced her to the team. She tried to smile, to appear confident, but inside she felt small and uncertain. Everyone seemed so busy and comfortable in their roles, and she couldn't help but feel like an outsider, someone who had to prove herself before she could belong. Her desk was small but neat, tucked into a corner where she could observe the office without drawing too much attention. She unpacked her bag, arranged her pens and notebooks, and logged into the computer. The tasks began almost immediately: emails, spreadsheets, filing, and phone calls. She did her best to keep up, but the pace was faster than she expected. Each small mistake made her heart race, and she worried that someone might notice and think she wasn't capable. Throughout the day, she noticed subtle things that made her feel isolated. Conversations among coworkers flowed easily, with inside jokes and references she didn't understand. People laughed together, shared stories about lunch spots and weekend plans, and she felt invisible, standing at the edge of a world she wanted to be part of but didn't yet belong to. She tried to join in, offering small comments, but the responses were polite and brief. She felt the distance between herself and the others, a barrier she couldn't quite cross. As the week went on, the pressures of her new job started to weigh heavily on her. Every morning she woke with a mix of anticipation and dread. She wanted to do well, to impress and to be accepted, but the fear of failing or being overlooked followed her at every step. Simple tasks seemed monumental, and small mistakes felt like personal failures. She began to doubt herself, questioning whether she was truly capable of keeping up with the demands of the office. The other employees were kind, but their kindness was cautious. They were busy with their own work and, while helpful when asked, didn't go out of their way to make her feel included. She understood that this was normal in a professional environment, but the combination of isolation, stress, and self-doubt made her feel overwhelmed. She often stayed late, trying to catch up to complete every task perfectly, and to ensure she didn't make any mistakes that would draw negative attention. During lunch breaks, she would sit quietly at a small table in the break room, eating her sandwich alone while watching groups of coworkers chatting and laughing. She felt a longing for connection, a desire to be noticed and accepted, yet she didn't know how to bridge the gap. She worried that reaching out too much would be seen as desperate, or that she might say the wrong thing and make a bad impression. So she kept her head down, focusing on the work in front of her and trying to survive each day. Despite the challenges, she was determined to succeed. She asked questions when she needed to, tried to anticipate tasks before they were assigned, and stayed organized. She kept a notebook of instructions and tips, reviewing it constantly to avoid mistakes. Her attention to detail was remarkable, and her dedication was clear to anyone who took the time to notice. Yet the effort came at a cost. She was exhausted, mentally and emotionally drained from constantly being on guard, from trying to fit in, and from pushing herself beyond what was comfortable. One day, a minor error in a report left her feeling embarrassed and defeated. She had double-checked everything, but a small oversight slipped through. She could feel the disappointment in herself, the frustration that all her effort hadn't been enough. She worried about what others might think, about whether she was making a bad impression and whether she would ever feel like she belonged. The anxiety gnawed at her, and by the time the workday ended, she felt as though she had carried a weight far heavier than any physical task could create. As she made her way to the break room for a cup of coffee, she felt her emotions spill over. The tears came quietly at first, a slow trickle, then faster until she was openly crying. She felt embarrassed, hoping no one would see, but at the same time she needed the release. The stress, the pressure, the loneliness, it was all too much. She had put so much of herself into her work, and yet she felt invisible, unseen, and unappreciated. It was in this vulnerable moment that she caught the attention of the undercover CEO. He was walking past the break room, carrying his own cup of coffee, when he noticed her sitting alone, crying quietly. Something about the sight stopped him. He felt a pang of empathy, a deep concern, and an instinct to help. He knew that this was more than just a bad day at work. It was a reflection of the pressures she was under, the isolation she felt, and the struggles that so many employees faced quietly. He approached her cautiously, not wanting to startle her, and asked softly if she was okay. She looked up, startled, and for a moment tried to hide her tears. But the concern in his voice made her feel safe enough to speak. She hesitated, then began to explain. She spoke about the overwhelming workload, the fear of making mistakes, and the pressure to perform perfectly despite being new. She shared how difficult it was to navigate the office, to fit in, and to feel like she belonged. Her words were raw, honest, and filled with a mix of relief and shame, as though confessing her struggles lifted a burden she had carried alone. The CEO listened carefully, offering quiet encouragement but no judgment. He felt a mix of emotions, sadness for her pain, admiration for her resilience, and a growing awareness of the challenges that so many employees faced behind closed doors. He realized that these moments, the unspoken struggles, the small acts of courage, were the true story of the company, not the numbers or reports that dominated boardrooms. Over the next few days, he continued to observe her from a distance, noticing how she worked diligently despite the difficulties, how she tried to connect with her coworkers despite her anxiety, and how she pushed herself to meet expectations. He began to see the subtle signs of her growth, the confidence that slowly emerged as she completed tasks successfully, the small smiles when a project went well, and the quiet pride in her work. Yet he also saw the ongoing challenges, the moments of doubt, the lingering stress, and the isolation that still accompanied her every step. He began to understand the importance of support, of recognition, and of empathy in the workplace. He realized that talent alone was not enough. Employees needed guidance, encouragement, and the reassurance that they were seen and valued. The young woman's journey illuminated these truths in a way that no report or meeting could. Her courage and dedication inspired him, and he felt a growing determination to ensure that the company would become a place where people could thrive, not just survive. The CEO also began to reflect on his own role in creating the environment she was navigating. He thought about the decisions he had made from his office, the policies he had implemented, and the ways in which the focus on efficiency and profit had sometimes overshadowed the human element. Seeing her struggles firsthand forced him to confront these realities, to recognize the gap between leadership and the people on the front lines, and to consider how he could bridge that gap. As the week drew to a close, the young woman continued to face challenges, but she also began to find her footing. She learned small ways to cope with the stress, to organize her tasks more effectively, and to reach out when necessary. She remained cautious and reserved, but she started to feel a sense of belonging, a small but meaningful connection to the office community. And the Undercover CEO, observing her journey, gained invaluable insight into the true heartbeat of his company, the dedication, struggles, and resilience of employees who gave their all each day. He realized that the story of this new employee was a mirror for the larger story of the company. Her experiences, emotions, and growth highlighted the importance of empathy, support, and human connection in creating a workplace where people could truly thrive. And as he prepared for what would come next, he knew that the encounter with this young woman would shape his decisions, his leadership, and his understanding of what it meant to lead not just with strategy, but with heart. The office hummed with activity as usual. Phones rang in quick succession, keyboards clicked in rhythm, and conversations flowed in low murmurs throughout the room. For most employees, this was a normal day, just another set of tasks to tackle before heading home. But for the new clerical worker, it was different. Every movement, every interaction, every glance carried a weight she felt more keenly than anyone else around her. She was caught in the middle of excitement and anxiety, trying to maintain composure while feeling the pressure mounting. She arrived at her desk early, hoping to get a head start before the office became fully occupied. She wanted to feel prepared, ready for whatever came her way and to prevent mistakes that might make her stand out for the wrong reasons. But as soon as she sat down, she felt the familiar tightness in her chest. Emails awaited her attention, reports needed organizing, and a phone call she wasn't expecting made her hands tremble slightly as she reached for the receiver. The day was relentless. Every task seemed to multiply. Each instruction came with a sense of urgency, and she felt herself stretching to meet expectations she wasn't sure she could reach. A small error on a report made her cheeks burn, a mistake she caught and corrected quickly, but the embarrassment lingered. She tried to focus on the next task, telling herself she could handle it, but her thoughts kept returning to that one slip, magnifying it into something far bigger than it was. During the morning, she made a conscious effort to engage with her colleagues. She asked questions when needed, offered her input during brief discussions, and tried to show her willingness to learn. The responses were polite, occasionally friendly, but nothing that truly bridged the gap she felt. She began to realize that connection wasn't just about trying. It was about the culture around her, about people noticing her presence, her efforts, and her struggles. And in that realization, a small sadness began to creep in. By midday, her fatigue was mounting. The stress of keeping pace, the emotional toll of trying to belong, and the constant vigilance to avoid mistakes were heavy burdens for someone new to the environment. She carried her lunch to the break room, hoping for a few moments of quiet, a brief respite before returning to her desk. But even there, she felt eyes on her from across the room. Some colleagues glanced in her direction, then quickly returned to their conversations. She felt the subtle exclusion, the sense that she was on the outside looking in. It was isolating, a quiet pain that no one seemed to notice. As she sat down, she tried to distract herself by scrolling through her phone and sipping her coffee. But the small nagging thoughts kept returning. Am I good enough? Am I making a mistake? Do they think I belong here? Each question was a tiny weight, accumulating, pressing on her chest until it became hard to breathe. She felt her eyes sting, and before she could stop it, tears began to form. She blinked rapidly, hoping they wouldn't fall, but the tension and pressure she had carried all morning were too much. A single tear slipped down, followed by another, until she was quietly crying at her table. It was then that the Undercover CEO entered the break room, carrying his own coffee, casually scanning the room. He had been observing quietly from a distance, learning about the day-to-day experiences of employees, but this sight stopped him. He noticed her posture, the way her shoulders were slumped, the quiet tremble in her hands. There was a vulnerability, a raw honesty in that moment that struck him deeply. Without thinking, he walked over, his voice soft and careful. He asked if she was okay, offering a presence that was gentle, non-intrusive, and sincere. She startled at the sound of a voice addressing her, looking up with reddened eyes and flushed cheeks. At first, she tried to brush it off, to assure him she was fine, to hide the fact that she had been crying. But something about the way he asked, the genuine concern in his tone, made it impossible to keep it inside. She hesitated, then spoke, her voice shaking but growing steadier as she released the thoughts she had been holding in for days. She spoke about the challenges she faced in her role, the pressure to perform perfectly despite being new, and the constant worry that any mistake would reveal her inadequacy. She spoke about the isolation she felt, the difficulty of connecting with colleagues, and the quiet fear that she was invisible in a place where recognition mattered. Her words tumbled out, raw and unfiltered, each sentence carrying the weight of her emotions and the honesty of her experience. She admitted the exhaustion that came from giving her best while feeling overlooked, the moments of doubt that gnawed at her confidence, and the frustration of striving to fit into an environment that seemed indifferent to her struggles. The CEO listened intently, offering no judgment, no interruption, just a presence that conveyed understanding. He realized in that moment how vital it was to truly hear employees, to recognize their challenges, and to appreciate the courage it took to face a day that could be so overwhelming. Her words, spoken in a quiet break room, were more impactful than any report or meeting he had ever attended. They revealed a side of the company he had never seen, a human reality that was invisible from the executive office. As she continued to speak, he noticed subtle gestures of stress, the way her fingers twisted in her lap, the slight tremor in her voice, and the way she looked around the room, as if seeking some invisible support. He felt a profound empathy for her, understanding that her struggle was not a reflection of weakness but of the immense pressure and responsibility she carried silently. He recognized the resilience, dedication, and courage it took to continue, despite the challenges, and he felt a sense of responsibility for the environment that had contributed to her distress. After a long pause, she finally finished, the words leaving her feeling both vulnerable and relieved. The silence that followed was not awkward but meaningful. It was a pause filled with understanding, a quiet acknowledgement of shared humanity. The CEO gently encouraged her, reminding her that everyone faces challenges and that seeking support is not a weakness. He emphasized that her effort and dedication were noticed, even if it didn't always feel that way, and that she had the right to be heard and valued. Over the next few days, he observed her more closely, noting the moments of growth and resilience. He saw her complete tasks with increasing confidence, navigate difficult interactions with grace, and slowly begin to feel a sense of belonging. He noticed her small smiles when a project went well, her careful attention to detail, and the subtle confidence that emerged as she became more comfortable in her role. Yet he also saw the ongoing challenges, the lingering stress, moments of doubt, and continued need for support. The break room encounter became a turning point for both of them. For her, it was a moment of release, validation, and human connection. For him, it was a lesson in empathy, leadership, and the importance of understanding employees' experiences on a personal level. He realized that leadership was not just about making strategic decisions or achieving financial success, but about creating an environment where people felt seen, supported, and valued. He began to reflect on his own approach, the policies and practices that might inadvertently contribute to stress and isolation, and the steps he could take to create a more supportive workplace. He considered mentorship programs, clearer communication, and opportunities for employees to connect and share their experiences without fear. He understood that change would not happen overnight, but that acknowledging the human side of the company was the first crucial step. The young employee, meanwhile, began to recover from the intensity of her emotions. She returned to her desk with a renewed determination, carrying the memory of being heard and understood. She started to reach out more, asking questions, sharing insights, and slowly forming connections with her colleagues. The simple act of having her struggles acknowledged gave her strength, confidence, and a sense of belonging that she had not experienced before. The CEO, continuing his undercover role, took careful note of the small interactions, the subtle shifts in behavior, and the moments of human connection that made a difference. He realized that the company's true story was not in the profits, the reports, or the meetings, but in these daily experiences, the challenges, resilience, and courage of employees navigating their work lives. He understood that supporting employees, recognizing their efforts, and addressing their struggles were not optional, but essential for a thriving organization. As the day ended, he reflected on what he had learned. The encounter in the break room was more than a single event. It was a revelation about leadership, empathy, and the true nature of success. He knew that the lessons he had learned from this young employee would guide his decisions, shape his approach, and inspire him to create a workplace where people could thrive, feel valued, and be truly supported. The experience left him with a deeper understanding of the human side of business, a renewed sense of purpose, and a commitment to making meaningful change. The days that followed the break room encounter were unlike any the CEO had experienced before. He continued his undercover role, but now with a deeper understanding, a more careful eye, and an open heart. Every interaction, every conversation, every glance carried new meaning. He was no longer just observing. He was learning lessons about leadership, empathy, and the unseen struggles of his employees. He watched the young clerical worker more closely now, not to intrude, but to understand. He saw the way she arrived early, determined to get a head start, and stayed late, striving to complete every task with precision. He noticed the subtle signs of stress, the way she hesitated before speaking in meetings, the careful monitoring of her own work, and the small sighs of relief when a task was finished successfully. Each detail told him a story of dedication, resilience, and courage that went unnoticed by most. One afternoon he followed her as she went about her work, noticing the challenges she faced. A new software update had caused errors in the reports she was preparing, and she struggled to correct them while keeping up with other tasks. She approached a colleague for advice, her voice hesitant but polite, and carefully noted the instructions. The CEO saw the way she juggled multiple demands, how she maintained composure even when frustration threatened to surface, and how she sought solutions without complaint. It was a display of quiet strength, and he felt a profound respect for her. As he observed, he began to reflect on his own leadership. He thought about the decisions made from his office, the focus on metrics and deadlines, and the ways in which efficiency often overshadowed the human element. He realized that the company's culture, while successful on paper, was failing to nurture the very people who made that success possible. He saw that employees were expected to perform at high levels without sufficient support, recognition, or understanding. This realization shook him more than any financial report or boardroom discussion ever could. The CEO decided to spend more time speaking with employees directly, still under his undercover persona. He asked simple questions about their work, how they felt, and the challenges they faced. Most conversations were brief, polite, and professional, but over time, patterns emerged. Employees shared small frustrations about unclear instructions, inadequate training, and lack of communication. They spoke about the emotional toll of constant pressure, the fear of making mistakes, and the desire to feel valued and appreciated. Each story reinforced what he had already begun to understand. Leadership was not just about strategy and profit. It was about people. The young clerical worker became central to his observations. He noticed how she had begun to find small ways to cope with the stress, organizing her tasks meticulously, creating checklists, and seeking guidance when necessary. Yet he also saw the lingering strain, the moments of self-doubt, and the emotional toll that came from pushing herself to meet expectations. Her perseverance was remarkable, but it also highlighted the gaps in the support system around her. One evening, as the office emptied and quiet settled over the building, he stayed late, reflecting on everything he had observed. He thought about the young worker, about her dedication and struggles, and about the countless other employees who faced similar challenges daily. He realized that the company's true success was not in the numbers or the profits, but in the well-being, growth, and engagement of its people. This realization was profound, reshaping his understanding of leadership and responsibility. He began to consider the changes that could make a meaningful difference. Mentorship programs, clearer communication channels, recognition initiatives, and opportunities for employees to share their experiences became ideas he wanted to implement. He understood that addressing these needs would not be easy, but the first step was acknowledgement, acknowledging that employees were human, that their struggles mattered, and that their dedication deserved recognition. As he continued his undercover work, he noticed subtle shifts in the office. Small gestures of kindness, moments of support among colleagues, and the quiet satisfaction of completing tasks effectively began to stand out. He realized that these moments were the threads that held the company together, the human connections that created a functioning and productive environment. Recognizing and nurturing these connections became a personal mission for him. The young worker, too, began to change. She still faced challenges, but she carried herself with a growing sense of confidence and self-assurance. The acknowledgement of her struggles, even in a brief interaction, had given her the courage to persevere. She began to engage more with colleagues, asking questions, sharing insights, and slowly forming connections that had previously seemed impossible. Her growth was a testament to the impact of empathy, understanding, and recognition. The CEO realized that leadership was not a matter of authority alone. It was about creating an environment where people felt safe, valued, and supported. It was about listening, observing, and responding to the human needs of the team. He understood that even small actions, a kind word, a moment of patience, a helping hand, could have profound effects on morale, performance, and loyalty. He began to plan the steps he would take once he returned to his executive role. He envisioned programs to support employees, initiatives to foster connection and communication, and changes to policies that inadvertently caused stress or isolation. He thought about training for managers to help them recognize and respond to the emotional needs of their teams. He understood that these changes would require effort, commitment, and persistence, but he was determined to create a workplace where people could thrive, not just survive. The days turned into weeks, and he continued to witness the resilience and dedication of employees like the young clerical worker. He saw how small improvements in support and communication could have a significant impact on morale and productivity. He noticed how recognition, even in subtle forms, motivated employees to give their best and take pride in their work. These observations reinforced his belief that empathy and understanding were not optional, but essential components of effective leadership. One afternoon, he watched the young worker complete a complex task she had been struggling with for days. She had researched, asked questions, and carefully executed each step. When she finished, she allowed herself a brief smile, a sign of relief and pride. The CEO felt a deep sense of satisfaction, not for himself, but for her. He realized that creating opportunities for such moments where employees could succeed, feel acknowledged, and experience growth, was the essence of meaningful leadership. He also began to recognize the importance of balance. Employees needed support, guidance, and recognition, but they also needed space to learn, grow, and develop resilience. Striking this balance was delicate but essential. It required attentiveness, patience, and a willingness to listen without judgment. The CEO understood that this was a responsibility he could no longer ignore. As his undercover experience continued, he felt a growing commitment to act. He could no longer see the company purely through the lens of profit and efficiency. He understood that true success required a human-centered approach, one that valued employees as individuals with unique needs, strengths, and vulnerabilities. He realized that by addressing these needs, he could create not only a more compassionate workplace, but also a more effective and sustainable organization. The young clerical worker remained central to his observations, a living example of dedication, perseverance, and the impact of human connection. Her journey illuminated the broader reality of the workplace, revealing both challenges and opportunities for growth. She inspired him to think beyond policies and procedures, to consider the emotional and psychological well-being of every employee, and to recognize that leadership was ultimately about people, not just strategy. By the end of his undercover period, the CEO had gained invaluable insights. He had seen the struggles, the resilience, and the courage of employees in a way that no report or boardroom meeting could have conveyed. He understood the importance of empathy, recognition, and support in creating a thriving workplace. And he knew that the lessons he had learned would guide his leadership decisions, shape the culture of the company, and create a foundation for meaningful change. The emotional revelation had transformed him. He no longer viewed the company as a collection of numbers and processes, but as a living community of people, each with their own story, challenges, and potential. He understood that listening, observing, and responding to these human experiences was the heart of effective leadership, and he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Determined to implement changes that would ensure employees felt seen, supported, and valued in every aspect of their work life. As he prepared to return to his executive role, he carried with him the lessons learned from the young clerical worker and the countless other employees he had observed. He understood that the true measure of success was not just financial performance, but the well-being, engagement, and growth of the people who made the company thrive. And with this understanding, he was ready to transform not only the workplace but the very approach to leadership, ensuring that empathy, support, and human connection became central to the company's identity and success. After weeks of working undercover, the CEO stepped back into his role in the executive suite, but he was no longer the same. The experiences he had lived, the people he had observed, and the stories he had heard had reshaped his understanding of leadership. He knew that the company's success depended not only on strategy and profit, but on the well-being and growth of the employees who made it possible. He was determined to turn insight into action. His first step was to review the organizational structure and identify areas where employees lacked support. He remembered the young clerical workers' struggles, the moments of stress, and the anxiety that came from being unseen. He realized that many employees likely faced similar challenges, and addressing these issues would require thoughtful, meaningful changes. He introduced mentorship programs for new hires, pairing them with experienced employees who could guide them, answer questions, and provide emotional support. The aim was to create a safe space where newcomers could learn, grow, and feel valued without fear of judgment. These mentorship programs were designed to help employees navigate the office culture, understand processes, and gain confidence in their abilities. Next, he focused on communication. Clear, consistent, and supportive communication became a priority at every level of the company. Managers were trained to provide guidance, feedback, and recognition in ways that reinforced employee growth and well-being. The CEO implemented regular check-ins, both formal and informal, to ensure that employees felt heard and supported. He recognized that communication was not just about instructions. It was about connection, trust, and understanding. Recognition programs were also introduced. He understood that employees thrived when their efforts were acknowledged. Small achievements, moments of resilience, and acts of teamwork were celebrated publicly, creating a culture where people felt appreciated. The young clerical worker, once isolated and anxious, began to feel the positive effects of these programs. Her efforts were noticed, her voice valued, and her presence respected. The CEO also reviewed training and development opportunities. He ensured that employees had access to resources that helped them succeed in their roles and grow professionally. Workshops, skill-building sessions, and opportunities for cross-department collaboration were introduced to empower employees, build confidence, and enhance career development. He knew that investing in employees was not just good ethics, it was essential for the long-term success of the company. As the changes took effect, he observed the impact firsthand. The young clerical worker began to flourish. She approached tasks with renewed confidence, collaborated more freely with colleagues, and participated in meetings without hesitation. Her stress levels decreased and her sense of belonging increased. She smiled more often, laughed with her peers, and even offered guidance to new colleagues, becoming a source of support for others. The CEO noticed similar changes across the company. Employees were more engaged, collaborative, and motivated. The office culture shifted from one of routine compliance to one of active participation, support, and mutual respect. Small gestures of kindness, encouragement, and recognition became part of daily life. People started to take pride not just in the work they did, but in the community they were part of. He also implemented feedback systems that allowed employees to voice concerns, suggestions, and experiences anonymously if they chose. This system ensured that leaders at every level could address issues before they escalated, creating a proactive approach to employee well-being. Employees felt empowered, knowing that their opinions mattered and could influence change. The young clerical worker used this system to share insights about her experience, which contributed to further improvements in training, communication, and support structures. The CEO regularly spent time on the floor, interacting with employees, observing their work, and listening to their stories. He maintained his approach of empathy and understanding, valuing each person's experience and perspective. He realized that leadership was not a matter of authority alone, but of presence, attentiveness, and the willingness to learn from others. His relationships with employees deepened, and the trust and respect between leadership and staff grew stronger. As the months passed, the company's culture transformed. Employee retention improved, collaboration increased, and overall morale rose. The focus on human-centered leadership paid off not only in productivity, but in creativity, innovation, and problem-solving. People felt safe to share ideas, take risks, and contribute meaningfully to the organization. The young clerical worker thrived in this environment, growing into a confident and capable professional who inspired others through her dedication and resilience. The CEO reflected on the journey that had brought him here. The encounter in the break room, the raw honesty of a young employee, and the lessons learned from observing the day-to-day realities of his team had fundamentally changed his approach to leadership. He understood that success was not measured solely by financial performance or market position, but by the well-being, engagement, and growth of the people who made the company function. He continued to lead with empathy, ensuring that policies, practices, and decisions always considered the human element. He maintained open lines of communication, encouraged collaboration, and prioritized recognition and support. Employees felt valued, seen, and heard, and the company thrived as a result. The young clerical worker's journey became a symbol of the transformation, a reminder that even small acts of understanding and support could have a profound impact. The CEO also shared the lessons he had learned with other leaders in the company. He emphasized the importance of empathy, observation, and human-centered decision-making. He encouraged leaders to walk in the shoes of their employees, to listen, to understand, and to act in ways that supported growth and well-being. The culture of the organization shifted from top-down management to collaborative leadership, where every voice mattered and every person was valued. In time, the young clerical worker took on more responsibilities and became a mentor for new employees. She used her experience to guide others, offering support, encouragement, and understanding. Her journey from isolation and anxiety to confidence and leadership served as an example for everyone, demonstrating the power of empathy, recognition, and human connection. The CEO watched with pride and gratitude, knowing that the changes he had implemented were making a real difference in people's lives. Through these actions, the company became more than a successful business. It became a community where employees felt safe, supported, and valued. The focus on human-centered leadership created an environment where people could thrive, collaborate, and grow. Employees were engaged, motivated, and committed, not just because of incentives or policies, but because they felt respected and appreciated. The CEO's undercover journey had transformed not only the company, but also his perspective on leadership. He understood that the true measure of success lay in the lives of the people who made the organization what it was. By listening, observing, and acting with empathy, he had created a workplace where people could succeed, feel valued, and experience personal and professional growth. As he looked around the office one day, watching employees work together, share ideas, and support each other, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The changes were visible in every interaction, every smile, every collaborative effort. He knew that the decision to go undercover, to see the company through the eyes of his employees, had been one of the most important decisions of his life. It had taught him that leadership was about more than strategy, profit, or control. It was about people, empathy, and the courage to create an environment where everyone could thrive. And in that moment, he understood the true impact of his actions. By valuing the human side of business, recognizing the struggles and efforts of employees, and fostering a culture of support and empathy, he had not only strengthened the company, but also enriched the lives of the people within it. The young clerical worker, once anxious and isolated, now thrived and inspired others. The company, once a collection of tasks and reports, had become a community of people who felt seen, heard, and valued. And the CEO, having witnessed it all firsthand, carried forward a commitment to lead with heart, compassion, and humanity in every decision he made. After seeing the positive changes unfold in the company, the CEO felt a renewed sense of purpose. He realized that transformation was not a one-time effort but an ongoing journey. Leadership required constant attention, reflection, and action to ensure that the human side of the business remained at the forefront. He knew that the culture he wanted could only thrive if he continued to actively engage with employees, observe challenges, and make thoughtful improvements. He began dedicating specific times each week to walk the office floor, interacting casually with employees, observing their routines and listening to their concerns. He did not wear his CEO persona openly, but kept the approach subtle, approachable, and genuine. He wanted employees to feel comfortable sharing their thoughts, to be honest without fear, and to feel that leadership truly cared about their experiences. The young clerical worker had now become a central part of this ongoing effort. She had grown significantly in confidence and capability since the initial break room moment. Her perspective, once quiet and hesitant, had become valued and sought after. She was invited to provide input on workflow improvements, efficiency strategies, and employee support initiatives. Her experience became a lens through which the CEO and other leaders could understand the real impact of policies and processes. Every interaction revealed nuances the leadership team had previously overlooked. For instance, small communication gaps had caused confusion and unnecessary stress, while minor delays in software updates or unclear instructions had created frustration among employees. The CEO documented these issues meticulously, not to assign blame but to find practical solutions that improved daily work life. He realized that success was built on the accumulation of small improvements that collectively created a supportive and efficient environment. Mentorship and coaching programs were expanded further. Senior employees volunteered to guide not only new hires, but also mid-level staff who wanted to develop leadership skills. These programs fostered a sense of community, strengthened collaboration, and encouraged peer learning. The young clerical worker, now more confident, became a mentor herself, guiding new employees through challenges she had once faced alone. Her empathy, combined with her first-hand experience, made her a natural and inspiring mentor.